"You don't belong here," Lincoln Brown's voice boomed. But Brian Ian, the 16-year-old runaway, didn't flinch. He had nothing to lose. Then Lincoln turned to his daughter, Amy, and saw her standing beside Brian, holding his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. The sun beat down on the immaculate lawns of Queen's Park Academy, a school where the air smelled like privilege and untouchable wealth. The students flowed through the gates, the sound of their laughter filling the air like music. It was a world that Amy Brown didn't quite fit into. She had the uniform, the perfect family, and the life most people dreamed of. But inside, she was empty, struggling with her studies and haunted by a deep sense of isolation. Amy's world was full of people, but she'd never felt more alone. That's when she met Brian. Brian wasn't supposed to be here. He didn't belong in the pristine, high-class world of Queen's Park Academy. He was a homeless kid, living in a shelter just a few blocks away, barely surviving on scraps. But there was something in his eyes, something that caught Amy's attention. A brilliance, a way of seeing the world she hadn't been taught. Under the shade of an old oak tree, Brian didn't just help her with math. He taught her about life, about how to face challenges, about resilience in a world that didn't always play fair. Their lessons became a secret, a bond between two souls who shouldn't have connected but did anyway. But when Lincoln Brown, the powerful billionaire who owned the school, found out what was happening, when he saw his daughter, the girl he loved more than anything, holding hands with a homeless boy in the garden, everything he thought he knew about the world, about wealth, about success, began to unravel. What happened next left everyone in shock. And it was the moment that changed Brian's life forever. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The very next afternoon, Amy skipped her usual ride home and walked straight to Meridian Hill Park. Brian was there, sitting under the same oak tree, reading a water-damaged copy of The Great Gatsby. "I want you to teach me," Amy said, sitting down beside him without hesitation. Brian looked up, startled. "Teach you what?" "Everything. Math. Reading. The stuff my tutors can't explain." She pulled out her algebra homework. "My dad pays people $100 an hour and I still don't get it. But you made it make sense." And so it began. Every day after school, Amy would meet Brian under that tree. He'd use sticks to draw equations in the dirt. He'd turn Shakespeare into stories she could visualize. For the first time in her life, learning didn't feel like pressure. It felt like freedom. Amy's grades started climbing. Her teachers noticed. But she never mentioned Brian's name. Meanwhile, her father barely noticed she existed. Another business trip. Another missed dinner. Another reminder that in his world, she was just another investment. Then one Thursday afternoon, as Brian explained fractions using acorns, Amy's classmate Madison walked by and stopped cold. Madison didn't waste time. By that evening, the rumor had reached someone's parent, who happened to work for Lincoln Brown. The mansion doors slammed open at 9 p.m. Amy Elizabeth Brown. Lincoln's voice echoed through the marble foyer like thunder. "Get down here. Now." Amy descended the grand staircase slowly, her heart pounding. Her father stood in his tailored suit, phone still in hand, his face red with fury. "A homeless boy." Lincoln's voice cracked with disbelief. "You've been meeting with some street kid in the park? Do you have any idea what this could do to our family's name? To your future?" "His name is Brian," Amy said quietly. "And he's smarter than anyone I know. I don't care if he's Einstein reincarnated." Lincoln shouted. "You are a Brown. We don't associate with." "With what, Dad?" "People who are struggling." People who are real. Lincoln's jaw clenched. This ends tonight. You will never see that boy again. No. The single word hung in the air like a grenade. Lincoln stared at his daughter, truly looked at her, for the first time in months. Her eyes weren't scared. They were determined. Alive. Something he hadn't seen since her mother passed. His phone buzzed. A text from Amy's headmaster. Her grades have improved dramatically this semester. Lincoln froze. 3 days later, Lincoln Brown did something he never thought he'd do. He went to Meridian Hill Park alone. He watched from a distance as Brian taught Amy geometry using broken branches and patience most adults didn't possess. The boy's clothes were threadbare, his shoes held together with duct tape, but his mind was sharp as a blade. Lincoln made a call. Within hours, he had Brian's story. Former foster kid, aged out of the system at 18, been on the streets for 8 months. No criminal record. Just bad luck and a system that had failed him. 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up to Brian's usual corner near the park. Mr. Brian Hayes? A driver in a suit stepped out. Mr. Lincoln Brown requests your presence for dinner tonight. 7 o'clock. The Capitol Grill. Brian's face went pale. Is Amy okay? She's fine. This is a private invitation. For you. That evening, Brian stood outside the restaurant in his cleanest donated clothes, hands shaking. Amy had texted him, "Trust me. Go. This could change everything." Inside, Lincoln sat alone at a private table. "Sit," he said, not unkindly. Brian sat. Lincoln slid an envelope across the table. Georgetown Preparatory School. Full scholarship. Housing included. It starts Monday. Brian's world stopped spinning. "Why?" he whispered. Lincoln's expression softened. "Because my daughter sees something in you that I was too blind to notice." Monday morning, Brian walked through the iron gates of Georgetown Preparatory School wearing a blazer that still had the tags on it. Everything felt wrong. The marble hallways. The kids with their designer backpacks. The way teachers looked at him, not with contempt, but with pity, which somehow felt worse. "You're the charity case," a boy named Preston muttered during lunch. "Lincoln Brown's little project." Brian said nothing. He'd heard worse on the streets. But Amy heard. "Say that again, Preston, and I'll make sure your father knows exactly what kind of person his son is becoming." Preston walked away. The weeks that followed were brutal. Brian studied until 2 a.m. every night, determined to prove he belonged. His essays were sharper than anyone's. His math scores climbed to the top of the class. Slowly, grudgingly, his classmates began to respect him. Even Lincoln noticed. "You're doing well," he said one evening at dinner. The first compliment Brian had ever received from him. Then the letter arrived. National Merit Scholarship Foundation. They wanted to feature Brian's story, from homelessness to academic excellence. But there was a problem. The application required his full history, including the reason he'd been in foster care, the reason he'd never told anyone. Have you ever wondered what it costs to hide who you really are, just to become who you're meant to be? If that question hits differently now, maybe this story is speaking to something real in you too. The cafe on M Street was quiet that Saturday afternoon. Amy stirred her untouched latte, eyes distant. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. Brian looked up from his scholarship paperwork. "Everyone thinks I have it all figured out," Amy continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The mansion, the money, the perfect grades. But the truth is, I've never felt more empty in my life." She took a shaky breath. "My mom died when I was 9, and my dad just disappeared into his work. I became this thing he could show off at galas. Look at my brilliant daughter. But he never asks how I'm actually doing. If I'm okay. If I'm even happy. Tears welled in her eyes. I've been trying to fill this void with perfect test scores, thinking maybe if I was exceptional enough, he'd finally see me. But you saw me when I was just sitting under a tree, struggling with fractions. Brian reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You're not alone anymore. Neither are you, she whispered back. They left the cafe together, laughing about something small, a moment of lightness. Then Amy froze. Across the street, leaning against his Bentley, arms crossed, stood Lincoln Brown. His eyes locked onto Brian. And this time, they weren't filled with curiosity. They were calculating something else entirely. That evening, Lincoln summoned Brian to his study. Sit. Brian obeyed, bracing for the worst. But Lincoln's expression wasn't angry. It was thoughtful. I'm hosting the Mid-Atlantic Business Summit next month. 500 executives, investors, policymakers. I want you to speak. Brian blinked. Me? About what? Your story. How you went from living on the streets to Georgetown Prep. People need to see that potential exists everywhere, even in places they refuse to look. Lincoln leaned forward. You could change minds, Brian. Maybe even change lives. The weight of it crushed Brian's chest. Mr. Brown, I don't belong on a stage in front of people like that. Neither did I once, Lincoln said quietly. My father was a janitor. I built everything from nothing. You remind me of who I used to be, before I forgot. 3 weeks later, Brian stood backstage at the Kennedy Center, heart hammering. Amy squeezed his hand. You've got this. The speech was flawless. Brian spoke about resilience, about Amy's kindness, about second chances. The room erupted in applause. Then, as Brian descended the stage, he saw her. A woman in the back row. Thin. Weathered. Eyes locked on him. His foster mother. The one he'd run from. The one who knew everything. Brian's blood turned to ice as Mrs. Garrett pushed through the crowd, her expression hard. Brian Hayes, she said loud enough for people to turn. Or should I say, the boy who stole $300 from my purse before disappearing in the middle of the night? The room went silent. Amy stepped forward. Who are you? His foster mother. The one he robbed. Mrs. Garrett's voice dripped with venom. You all think he's some inspiration? He's a thief. Brian's hands trembled. Every eye in the Kennedy Center was on him. Lincoln moved closer, but Brian held up a hand. She's right, Brian said, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. I did take that money. And I ran. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But what she didn't tell you, Brian continued, is that I took it to pay for my younger foster brother's medication. Asthma attack. No insurance. Mrs. Garrett refused to help because it wasn't in the budget. His voice cracked. I chose him over my own safety. And I'd do it again. Mrs. Garrett's face went pale. The room exploded, not in condemnation, but in applause. Lincoln stepped onto the stage beside Brian. This young man just proved something invaluable. Integrity under fire. He looked directly at Brian. How would you like to help me build a foundation for kids just like you? 6 months later, Brian stood in Lincoln Brown's study, no longer as a guest but as family. The Second Chance Foundation had launched with 50 scholarship recipients. Kids from shelters, foster care, the streets. Each one given what Brian had been given, a real shot. You sure about this? Lincoln asked, watching Brian pack for his first day at Georgetown University. Full ride. political science major. More sure than I've ever been about anything, Brian said. Graduation day at Georgetown Prep had been surreal. Brian walked across that stage in a cap and gown that fit, with Amy cheering louder than anyone, and Lincoln, stern, impossible Lincoln Brown, wiping his eyes in the front row. That night, Lincoln had pulled Brian aside. "I need to tell you something." Brian waited. "When my wife died, I shut down. I threw myself into work because feeling nothing was easier than feeling everything. Amy suffered for that." His voice cracked. "You gave me my daughter back. And somehow, you gave me a son I didn't know I needed." Brian's throat tightened. "Mr. Brown." "Lincoln," he corrected. "Just Lincoln." Now, standing in that same study, Brian looked at the framed photo on the desk. Him, Amy, and Lincoln at the foundation's opening. A family built not by blood, but by choice. Amy appeared in the doorway. "Ready?" Brian smiled. "Yeah, I'm ready. Because here's the truth we forget. Home isn't where you start. It's where someone finally sees you and decides you're worth fighting for. If you believe stories like Brian's matter, if you think second chances are worth giving, then maybe you'll carry this one with you. Subscribe, and let's keep telling the stories others try to silence.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed the story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you, my beautiful family.